Hey everyone, there was recently a lot of discussion that kind of started from this tweet by Fuzzy, and there's a lot of Twitter screenshots I could bring up, but I kind of just want to go over my own opinion on the matter. So I'll start by reading off the tweet as quickly as I can here. Fuzzy said, in regards to why Squeezer isn't picked as much in West, I think our meta is so unevolved that the base level of gameplay where Squeezer would be dominant hasn't been reached yet by West and does not currently have the trajectory to reach in the foreseeable future. The top teams in our scene historically push towards safe options, which trickles down to the base level of gameplay. Our ranked has no structure, there are few informative videos on how to play the game properly, which leads to a vicious cycle of horrible ranked experience, high-level players growing disgruntled, low-level players have nowhere to learn, and everyone is spamming LDE Suction Zuka hoping it'll carry them to the new era 3K. The only option I think can somehow save us to improve the base level of gameplay is giving them the proper tools to learn, therefore increasing the skill of everyone over time. It really started in my generation. Fuzzy was a top S1 player for those who don't know, and we let everyone down by gatekeeping our strategies. So there's a lot to talk about in that tweet. You know, that's part of why discussion started so much. I want to start by talking about West versus Japan, and then I'll talk a little bit about scene growth, because right now top level is very dead and inactive. There's not a whole lot of major tournaments. There's not a whole lot of top teams playing the game right now. There's not really a whole lot of anything going on right now. So let's start by Japan. So, you know, disclaimer, I am not Japanese. I try to keep up with the JP scene best I can from following players and looking at tournaments and, you know, all that stuff. But I can't keep up as well as someone who is actually in the scene and can speak the language and all that. So there may be some things I'm getting wrong, and a lot of this comes from my observations from being around a while. So the first thing I want to get out of the way, because I don't think people talk about this enough, and I didn't see it as much in discussion earlier, it is unfair to compare the West and Japan as if it is on even footing, or to pretend like we can do the same things that JP scene does. Like, Japan has a lot more one-tricks, and they have a lot more experimentation and tournament results, but that's partially because they have a better scene. They have more players, they have a better solo experience, and everyone in that scene lives in roughly the same place and speaks the same language. Here there's time zone differences, language differences, and a bunch of other stuff getting in the way, in addition to us being the smaller of the two scenes. By a lot. And this affects content too, because content was talked about a lot. You know, Japan has a lot more top players making content. And I have talked with a lot of players on making content. I think this is something we can do better at. But I'm also not going to sit here and pretend like it's a fair comparison. There is a lot of videos of JP top players playing solo queue with a little bit of commentary that have hundreds of thousands of views or tens of thousands of views quite frequently. And that is not the same here. And the comparison I remember the most for this, the way I would illustrate just how different content is between the scenes, is I remember Ollie uploaded a video of an Octo Expansion world record. I believe it was a Squiffer individual level, you know, like a short 30-second clip, right? And he uploaded it to his channel, and the last time I checked, it was a bit ago, it had about 14,000 views. You know, pretty good. It got uploaded to a JP Clips channel with permission as far as I'm aware. And it has, last I checked, I think it was around 1.1 million views. And, like, it's such a large number difference, I don't think people really comprehend how massive that difference is. It's the same video, by the way. Same video. And so I want to get that out there. It is not the same between scenes. Both content-wise and competitive-wise, we are at a major disadvantage. And so trying to pretend like we can just do the same stuff Japan does is not reasonable or fair at all. This isn't to say we can't do better. This isn't to make an excuse. But, like, it has to be acknowledged. So, next up I want to talk about playstyle differences that I believe lead to these developments, and I'll get into detail with them more later, but I think when Japan approaches the game, it tends to be a little bit more objective-focused, a little bit more disciplined in terms of being able to apply pressure without overextending as much. And at its best, I believe this leads to simple, more consistent strategies in terms of execution. At its worst, sometimes it leads to cheesy ideas that break down when people just run standard toolkits in the game. The West, on the other hand, tends to have more well-rounded comps. Things like having enough paint or entry tools or blah, 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 blah. We tend to checklist stuff a little bit better. and we also tend to play a little bit more aggressively. Sometimes maybe a little bit too aggressively. Oftentimes, though, this leads to overextension or missing simpler ideas to be able to win situations in the game. So, what do I think about the West being behind? Kinda. Japan will always be able to try more stuff and theory craft more than us. Again, they have the better solo and player base and all of that I talked about earlier, which is to be expected. And I think there are areas they are behind. Or sorry, there are areas they are ahead. But I think to simplify it as the West is purely, completely behind Japan is not accurate. And the best example I can give is Pencil. And part of this is because Pencil fit how we played the game better. It's part of those style differences I talked about prior. And while Japan has had Pencil for a while, Pencil became standard, best backline type deal thing for us far sooner, months ahead than it did in Japan. For a while, we were ahead in that area of developments. So sometimes it happens the other way around. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Japan isn't ahead most of the time. They absolutely are. But there are instances where that's not the case. Recently, the development with Japan has been Junior won a tournament, people were looking at Junior a little bit as a Zuka counter, and now Neo Splash is being picked because it deals with Junior very well, stuff like that, right? It seems like a very natural development. But what's the difference here? In the Western scene, we have a bit more Stamper being picked, a lot more active Stamper players, whereas Japan has more Squeezer. And so for us, it didn't really make as much sense to pick Junior. For one, we don't have as much Zuka, because we don't have as much Shot plus Squeezer, and that's like the only really good double Zuka comp. And for the other factor, we have more Sword Bucket, which Sword Bucket is good enough at dealing with Junior on its own. So there wasn't really as much of a reason for us to pick Junior. Whereas Junior not only better fits how Japan plays the game, but it also did better against what was more common there. So, like, we kind of skipped over Junior, and there were a few other Western top players who, you know, kind of thought Junior was a dead end anyway because of Neo Splash or other options to counterplay it, like the Stamper Bucket I talked about earlier. So I don't think we necessarily fell behind when it came to Junior. I think, if anything, we kind of knew that Junior wasn't going to go anywhere. Not that Junior's bad. It has its use case and it's there, but that use case wasn't really necessary here. I know we complain about Zuka a lot and nobody likes it here, but if you go look at top tournaments over the past, like, month or two, there's not really a whole lot of double Zuka at the top level. There is a lot at levels lower down, and that's something I'll get to later, but I don't think top level has particularly struggled with Zuka for quite a while. I think people just don't like it, because it's terrible for the game. But that's a different thing. But, you know, there are areas where things are different, though. Like, Neo Splash is an obvious one. Because of the way things develop differently in Japan, Neo Splash came up a lot sooner than it did here, and now we're playing catch-up because Neo Splash is good outside of being a counterpick to Junior. The ability to put your short-range shooter on a more supportive tool that paints more and gets more specials that paint is very nice for speed. Paint translates to speed. And when you have a lot of double midline comps that don't want to paint a lot, having the short-range shooter fit that specialized role more sometimes helps out better. So there's a lot of reasons for Neo Splash to survive outside of use case against double Zuka. So unlike Junior, this is probably something where we do need to catch up on and actually figure it out. And, you know, I don't know how good Neo Splash will be at the end of the day. You know, weapons always get trendy for a little bit, and then people figure out counterplay, and stuff changes. Either it lasts or it doesn't. We don't really know where it's gonna go. There's been examples of that over different periods of time. But I think what's important for discussion here is things develop differently because of how Japan plays the game. And there's definitely an argument to be made that we could play the game more similar to them. But I don't think the lack of developments are because of that, necessarily. I think it's more just the differences in the scene. So, what do we need to change? What's actually the problem? I think there's 3 different avenues we can look at this. One of which is experimentation and theory crafting. Another one is content and the ability to improve motivation. And the third one is the differences in high level right now and how far behind that is. So, let's start with the obvious one. I think the points about theory crafting and trying things in West are correct. there's extremely little experimentation. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to try that I haven't been able to do as much. For example, I'd really like to try Reflux for the short-range weapon a little bit more, since it's buff. I'm kind of curious how that would play out. I've been curious about a few other different weapons. And, you know, I've seen people like Gray talk about wanting to try stuff like Junior Edit, but not being able to find anyone at his level to be able to test it with. And, you know, I think the tricky part about that is the smaller player base means it's harder to test stuff. But I also think it's an issue where people are afraid to test things in practice. People tend to only want to practice what's safe, and I think that's something that we could actually change. I think that scrims should be more of a time to test other ideas, to figure out and understand the game better. And I think that needs to be more of a focus in these discussions, is not just that things are being picked, but why they're being picked. I've seen a lot of talk on stuff like Neo Splash and Junior that is like, oh my god, they're picking Neo Splash, we should be picking it too, and they're picking it and we're not picking it, and stuff like Junior that's like the same thing, and also, okay, Japan picks Neo Splash, like Japan's picked Junior, Junior's obviously the answer to Double Zuka West, what are we doing? When, no, it's not that simple. The conversation isn't that easy. And I think there needs to be a bit more of a talk about, okay, actually, why haven't we been picking Junior? Is there a good reason or no? Because, again, I've tried to explain a little bit more why I believe developments have gone the way they have, but it's not as simple as Western scene is just brain dead and doesn't try anything. I still think that the main issue is we need to figure out how to experiment with the sense of improving our understanding of the game more than anything else. I'm just going to play a random solo replay because I didn't have anything else pinned. I think that's important, that we focus on improving the game and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the hard part here, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, my apologies, is that I don't really think there's an easy way to experiment with stuff right now. I think the solution to experimenting more is more players at whatever level needs to be experimented on, which means improving the scene. Let's talk about content briefly. I absolutely think more top players should be putting stuff out there, like how to get better at the game, or their thought process during a match, and stuff like that. Obito recently did a video on that on his channel. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. He just broke down a 52 game he did in a pickup scrim. I think that was really good. We could absolutely use more stuff like that. But I think for more stuff like that to happen, players have to be more receptive to it. This kind of content needs to be supported. There need to be players who are more willing to ask questions to other players or to watch content and leave more thoughtful information in terms of trying to improve. I think people need to be more open-minded to it, because I think top players would be more open to doing content if people were more receptive to it in general. And a lot of people talk about wanting this content and wanting these avenues to improve, but the sad reality, and I've seen this over the years, is when people actually put the resources out there, very few of them actually use it. And, you know, the hard part is, when you're getting better at a game, a lot of it is not super fun at times. Sometimes getting better is sitting down and watching someone else play the game for an hour and taking notes. Part of it is looking back at bad matches and trying to get better at it. Part of it is going into the hell that is X-Rank solo queue and not making excuses about it. And sometimes that's not fun. And so, regardless of what resources are out there, I think that's part of the factor here. And I've mentioned that top level's been kind of dead right now because there's been a lack of tournaments, and I think that's been a problem forever. I don't know the solution to it, but yeah, when there's not major tournaments, top level loses motivation. And like, you know, if you're demotivated because you don't like the game right now, that's different, that's fine. But if your motivation to being better at the game is strictly tied to playing competitive events, then I don't know. I feel like there's a bit of an issue there, because, at least to me, one of the reasons I don't think I burn out very much and I'm able to play the game so much is I just enjoy getting better at the game. I enjoy learning about the game and thinking about it. I don't really need a big tournament every 2 weeks to stay motivated for me. And I kind of wish that mentality was a bit more common, because I think that's just a healthier way to approach the game in general. So, I don't have a solution for that. And, you know, everyone's motivated for different reasons, and obviously winning tournaments is a big factor for competitive players. I don't want to pretend it's not. So, you know, I get it. Finally is scene development and high level. I've played a few high level scrims or Sendoku recently. And honestly, it's really off-putting to play it because it's so different. The amount of times I see like double Zuka, like not even squeezer shot, like double shot, or just like triple short range, triple shooter, stuff like that, it's very off-putting to me because the majority of top level scrims just don't have these comps at all. The style of play is so dramatically different, and I would go as far as to say there's never been more of a divide between how the best teams play and like higher level to mid level teams play. I think there's such a huge difference there, and I'm not really sure why. I think part of it might be that weapons like Stamper, Squeezer, or Bucket, or any of it are more dedicated weapons. So maybe there's just not as many players of those weapons at those levels. I don't know, but it's different. And I think that a big issue with Zuka, and I believe Fuzzy's mentioned before that if he could ban any weapon, I know this was a while back, he would ban shot for the better development of the scene. And I think this is kind of an issue that we haven't talked about as much. I think that tools like Zuka and shot create strategies that work very well until a certain level, and people get stuck into using those strategies instead of learning what's best and playing around that. And I think that halts development because at some point you have to switch from that playstyle to playing, you know, midline stuff, having your short range be support players, having mid-range Slayer weapons be the main playmakers, and it's just so, it's very different. So I'm not sure if that's something that people are able to learn and get a handle on as easily from there. And, you know, I'm not super familiar with high level, so hey, this is another aspect where people will have to comment a little bit on it, but at least for me, I think that more people should be putting in an effort to learn the strategies that is closer to the meta and understanding it, and part of that is what I already talked about, where I think there needs to be more of an understanding into why things are picked that's more than surface level. Because I think as long as discussions are like, oh, there's so much Zuka, we should just be picking Bubble, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I think there has to be more specifics as to why things are picked and what the role of weapons are right now. And so I don't know how this discussion went. This was a long one for an unscripted one, so hopefully I kept it as concise as possible. I think there's a lot to dive into with this topic, and if there's one thing I can end off on, this isn't new. Japan developing things before we do, and the differences in their playstyle, top level being dead or demotivated at certain times, development in the scene and resources, none of these are new topics. I don't even think some of these are the worst they've ever been right now. Some of them have been worse than they are right now. But I think the issue is when these are brought up, I don't think there are often solutions and changes that really fix these issues. It's part of why they're talked about. And I don't think any of these are going to go away. But I do think there are better ways of approaching it. So I just wanted to kind of ramble and get my thoughts out there in a concise format. So hopefully this helps. Thanks for watching.